So the coach had to reshuffle the defense line for the Moroccan team. So that played enormously on them. But I hope that this afternoon against Croatia, they are going to maybe come out, bring another team that will get Africa, make Africa proud. You know, being on the podium on the day of award of medals is something very important. So I just but wish the Moroccans well. They've created history like Cameroon did in the 90s. I think 2022 will go down into the annals of African football, that Morocco is the first African team to have played the semis of the World Cup, and why not getting a third position? I wish them well.
Thank you, Ernest Akufo. Kunguba, I want you to, what do you have to say about those who say that this was an all-African semi-final, Morocco versus France, and it was very difficult to choose which team to support?
I think France was even more African than Morocco in this game, because when you look at the colors of people, they identify Africans as black and foreigners or Europeans as white. You look at the two teams and you see the color of the human beings who were representing those two nations. You realize that France was more African than Morocco. And the other thing that I try to decry out is that Morocco, they don't really consider themselves as Africans. And they say it openly to who wants to hear it, which is not something good for our continent. As after the qualifications from quarterfinals to semifinals, we heard some of their players during their interviews saying very well that they dedicate the victory to the Arab countries, Muslims and Moroccans particularly.
Yeah, but the coach later corrected that.
The coach, you know, correcting it after it's just a way of to do things. The player that did the interview was saying his mind and the mind of others. It's not for nothing that he said that. So if the coach is coming after, it's because of maybe all what was said after that interview. But I want to say we are proud of the Moroccans for helping Africa go another step at the World Cup. What Cameroon did in the 90s, today Morocco is doing, have done it, and this will enable Africa to have more space for at the World Cup again. But even though it had already been arranged even before Morocco's performance, I think that has already been arranged.
I think that was political, but now theoretically and practically, Morocco imposed it to FIFA for them to respect it to performance in the World Cup, as well as it was a good experience for other African
country to see how football, how things have been done in the second phase of the World Cup. You know, when we go for the first phase, there's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of teams, and but when we go for the second phase, during which we saw Morocco, and as Ernest earlier said, many players were already exhausted during the first match that they won. So it played a lot on the performance of the team yesterday. But we think that will be a team, and the team is still very young, and most of the players who played during this World Cup should certainly be there again next World Cup, and having this experience that they had, they will be able to do better.
Thank you. Maybe we leave this topic.
Yes.
Because I want to ask a question. I think we've noticed that Morocco or some African countries, when they reach this critical stage of the competition, they always make some kind of errors, which many describe as, I mean, silly errors.
I wouldn't want to call that Elvis errors. I want to call it inferiority complex. Yes, call it that way, because you can't imagine. This is not the first time. We saw Senegal last time, the last time they featured at the World Cup. We all Africans were, all eyes were on Senegal, but you can't tell what happened. I just feel that at a certain point in time, the Africans say, we never expected to be here. At long last, we are here. we've overdone it. So that complex, I want to believe, is a complex. Whereas, you know, the president of Cameroon Football Federation, Samuel Eto'o, he told his players before they went to the World Cup, know that you play in the same team with these guys. Know that they have 2 legs like you. Know that they have 1 head like you. But how does it happen that when the competition, the more it progresses, you see, instead of the African teams holding tight, like Morocco yesterday, in spite of on Wednesday, in spite of the fact that they had players who were already exhausted, but they could still. I think they were a little panicky. I don't know how can I put it. Yes, because
they were afraid to attack.
They even had chances which they had to concretize and maybe tell the French we are up to it, but it's rather unfortunate. Nevertheless, we say we are proud, and then bravo to the French national side, Les Bleus. I just hope that tomorrow against Argentina, we'll have quality soccer, because the 2 teams, they have the 2 best players, I can say, of the tournament. Lionel Messi with 5 goals, Kylian Mbappe with 5 goals, and you see both teams have each scored. Argentina has scored 12 goals, and France has scored 13, with Lionel Messi scoring 5, Kylian Mbappe scoring 5, and you know both play for Paris Saint-Germain. So I don't know how they are going to going to do it tomorrow Sunday. We'll be seeing 2 guys who play for the same team. They'll now be fighting against each other. Well, that's football and sports.
That is football and that is sports. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, our sports programs are going to be coming back to this topic to analyze what went wrong for Africa in the World Cup, which is going to end tomorrow with the final game between Argentina versus France. Of course, our sports department is going to be coming up with special programs in that light. Time for us now, ladies and gentlemen, to focus on the U.S.-Africa Summit. U.S.-Africa Summit. What can Africa gain from the U.S.-Africa Summit? Are we into a new scramble for the continent? What is happening? We've had the U.S.-Africa Summit. We've heard of the France-Africa Summit. Russia too is trying to woo Africa. China too is trying to woo Africa. At the end of the day, what can Africa gain from all of these summits, especially at this particular point in time, with focus on the U.S.-Africa Summit? Now, before I get to the speech, that was the keynote speech that was delivered by President Joe Biden to African leaders that have been invited to this U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, D.C. Let me read an excerpt of a speech that was made by President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana, who has called on African countries to stop begging from the West in order to earn global respect and change poor perceptions about the continent. He said, I quote, quotation marks open, if we stop being beggars and spend African money inside the continent, Africa will not need to ask for respect from anyone. We will get the respect we deserve. If we make it prosperous as it should be, respect will follow. But before we come to that speech of President Nana Akufo-Addo, which has gone viral online and which will be analyzed by my panelists, I also want to indicate that in the course of this show, we are going to be queuing in international relations. Professor Elvis Ngolle, who studied in the United States, of course, who is the director of the CPDF Academy, but also who is a lecturer of international politics and international relations in various institutions across Africa. He will be coming in to give his own perspective on that. But before then, let us listen to an excerpt of the speech that was presented by the U.S. President Joe Biden to African leaders in Washington. And I'll be right back in the studio with my guest to analyze.
I want to thank Secretary Mundo. She is one of the brightest and best folks I have working with me, and for all of you in this room for making this forum a success, particularly in Prosper Africa, Deal Room. That sounds like something that we shouldn't be saying. Prosper Africa, Deal Room. I kept asking, where's the deal room? I think I'm looking at it. Folks, I want to thank you all for being here, particularly since I said Morocco is about to play as the first African nation in the semifinals of the World Cup. Distinguished heads of state, leaders of regional and global institutions, and of course, representatives of more than 300 companies, African and American. Welcome to Washington. And I want to recognize our co-hosts, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Corporate Council of Africa, two great champions for building and growing ties of business and trade and investment between Africa and the United States, as well as the members of my administration and the members of Congress who are here today. All the members of Congress, please stand up if you're here so I can identify who you are. There's the man. All right, and I'm sure you're out there somewhere. Look, this forum is about building connections. It's about closing deals, and above all, it's about the future, our shared future. We've known for a long time that Africa's success and prosperity is essential to assuring a better future for all of us, not just for Africa. I've been engaged in these issues going back to my days as a young man in the United States Senate. When I was on the Foreign Relations Committee, I was chairman of the African Affairs Subcommittee and got to spend a lot of time in Africa. I visited almost all of your countries. When I was vice president serving with President Obama, we hosted the first U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, including U.S.-Africa Business Forum. We saw so clearly the enormous potential that we could harness if we did it together. And holding the first of its kind summit in 2014 was a watershed moment to cement new kinds of partnerships between our nations. Partnerships not to create political obligation, not to foster dependence, but to spur shared success, and emphasize shared success and opportunity. Because when Africa succeeds, the United States succeeds. Quite frankly, the whole world succeeds as well. Now, 8 years later, the world has undergone a great many changes. We're still grappling with the deadly pandemic, facing down war and instability, addressing economic challenges with global impact, fighting rising food prices, tackling the impacts of climate change. And each of these crises has only heightened the vital role African nations and peoples play to address the global challenges that drive our global progress. We can't solve any of these challenges without African leadership at the table. And I'm not trying to be nice, that's a fact. African ideas and innovation helping to shape the solutions, and African population contributing to every step. So the only question when I took office was not if we'd host another U.S.-African Leadership Summit, but when. My administration's engagement with Africa and the priority we place on these relationships began on day one. We've been working steadily with regional diplomacy and investments to demonstrate our commitment. We harnessed decades of cooperation through PEPFAR and President's Malaria Initiative and other partnerships in global health security to help save lives and combat COVID-19. The United States delivered 231 million doses of vaccines to 49 countries across Africa, and worked together with you to get the vaccines into the arms in hard-to-reach communities. Critically, we invested in Africa's capacity to manufacture its own vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics so Africa can meet its own needs and contribute to the global supply chain. And even as we work to end COVID-19, we continue building stronger health systems and institutions and accelerating efforts to achieve universal health coverage, to make sure we're better prepared to tackle the health challenges, including the next pandemic, and there surely will be one. We also advanced our commitment to strengthen food security, including expanding the Feed the Future program to partner with 8 additional African countries. And I'll be speaking more tomorrow about this effort to both address the immediate food crisis and strengthen the food system in Africa for the long term. We're taking on climate crisis, prioritizing not just energy transition in America, but in nations of all of Africa. And
that was an excerpt of President Joe Biden and, of course, a few things came out. I picked up a few things from his keynote address. One of the things he said is, if Africa succeeds, the whole world succeeds. I wanted to analyze that, Lionel.
Elvis, you know, as we usually say, Africa is the mother of the world. Without Africa, no child can grow, because you can't grow without being breastfed by your mother. Today, all of them, they are running behind Africa. You hear about French Africa. They take Africa as if Africa is a country. Why don't they say Europe-Africa Summit? They say French Africa Summit, U.S-Africa Summit, Russian Africa Summit. Why don't they gather and talk as a continent with the continent Africa? The other thing is, do they value the relationship, the mutual relationship, the mutual partnerships that we have between these countries who are claiming to be our friends or to be our partners? They don't respect the mutual relationships, the mutual partnerships that we create, that we sign with them. And today, they are still in 2022 taking the place of the master. Because when you see and when you listen to Joe Biden, you realize that they don't have that place of a country talking to a continent. They don't have that place of a partner talking to another partner. But they are instead talking to people who they think they have a certain power on. They can still manipulate. But it's rather very unfortunate that most of those who are the African leaders who went there didn't say this openly, because these are things that when you call for a summit like that, things like that have to be said. That if we are sitting here talking about Africa and US, it should be discussion between two partners and not between the master and the slave. I believe again and very well that if these leaders impose a certain norms to these foreign countries or to these countries who are on daily basis wishing and wanting to still penetrate our Africa. Because you know, Africa, no matter how these people have devastated our natural resources, we still have them. Especially, I will take the example of our country, Cameroon, we still have them. So, I think it's high time this relationship should be redefined in such a way that we have mutual respect.
Thank you, Kunguba. Ernest, one of the things President Joe Biden said is we can't solve global challenges without African leadership. Do you see our African leadership ready to be at the forefront in solving global crises?
Before I come to your question, I want to say international relations is all about interest. When there's no interest, there's no action. When you look at the United States African Leaders, it's precise, African Leaders Summit, it shows that there is something underneath. Because when this summit held for the first time in 2014 with former US President Barack Obama, because this one is holding 8 years after that one did hold. You see that there is something, there's a jewel in the African leaders, or in Africa, because currently Africa is the underexploited continent, be it in human resources, be it in natural resources. That's why you keep hearing France-Africa Summit, Russia-Africa Summit, China-Africa Summit, Turkey-Africa Summit, U.S.-Africa Summit, because the jewel is there, the pearl is still in the African continent, be it in the subsoil, be it in the human resources. You see, constantly there is this a lottery which is being launched by either Canada, either USA, either wanting to get the manpower which we still have very strong and vibrant in Africa, so that they can get over there. So when President Biden says that we can't solve world's problems without Africa, nobody lives in isolation. Yes, the world is an ensemble. because if we're talking of the United Nations organization, I think there was every reason to create the United Nations organizations after World War I and World War II, because there was a need to bring people together, to sit on a table and talk things out.
Do you have the impression that the United Nations organization is doing the job it is supposed to do?
It's rather unfortunate that her original missions may not constantly being met. Her actions at times are derailed and don't come when expected. Well, I want to think of the case in point, like that we're living in a backyard in Cameroon. We expected them to already come out vehemently and say, enough is enough. We can't get people being killed day in and out. They are doing something, but is it commensurate? I say no. No, because you see, like the Security Council of the United Nations organizations, some people have the veto power to be there and they can decide what happens at what moment. Why can't we co-opt from all of the continents and they are part of that council? So you see that when President Biden says that the African peace or the peace in the world cannot be gotten without African leaders on board, is because it demands a whole to make peace. It doesn't demand one person to make peace. And know that we don't give peace, we make peace. And in the peace-making process, people must chat things out across the board. So I think he's very right when he says that.
Thank you. Let us now go to the machines and get an excerpt of Professor Elvis Ngolle. In Cameroon, he is popular as the chairman of the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement Academy, which is like the think tank of the ruling party in Cameroon. But also, he is a professor of political science and professor of international relations. So he better understands this kind of topic, especially as someone who studied in the United States of America in the same batch like Condoleezza Rice. So let's get his perspective about what Africa can gain from this U.S. summit.
Africa should continue to think in terms of partnership, cooperation. That is the way it can accelerate its development. Disconnection, disengagement do not help us. Sure, we all agree that that world, given our history, slavery and colonization and all the other maneuvers that the world has known, have been unfair to Africa. But they're not really because we have a history of unfairness, a history of injustice, or a history, therefore we should disconnect. My friend, I like to joke with my students. Never divorce your wife simply because you didn't like the breakfast or lunch or dinner that she has cooked for you. She's still your wife. Never disconnect when your interests are concerned. Your interests are not an issue affair. Your interests, make sure they're global. Your interests, make sure you're always connected. When you are disconnected, when you divorce, when you separate, you take yourself backwards. And that is why I'm against secession. That is why I'm against all those who believe that in order to solve the problem, you must cut off, you must disconnect. Once you do that, you have a problem. Because guess what? Take your mouth. I like, again, because I'm always in that jovial mode. If your one tooth in your mouth is bad, the tendency is for you to take it off. But what do you normally do when you take it off? As you know, if you really want to be serious with your mouth, what do you usually do? What do people usually do? Isn't it they look for another tooth? Usually it's an artificial tooth. Or another tooth from another. Then they put another tooth. Never disconnect. Professor, God doesn't make a mistake. God is I don't want to sound like a pastor. You must always be connected. That's short what I'm saying. Disconnection is against your interest.
Professor, this last question before we go, we understand that African countries present in Washington are requesting money. Issues all about money, finance from the United States. But there is one thing that I'm not also a pastor. But I would also,
we shouldn't pretend to be.
And I want you to spend when I'm right or wrong. That no matter the amount of money that President Biden decides to give Africa at the summit, he can say 10 trillion. One thing is very sure. I'm not a prophet, but I know that if he gives that amount of money, even if it's trillions,
he will not solve all our problems.
In 10 years, the same African will be in Washington to make speeches asking for finance. So it means that we have a problem with management, a problem with governance, and a problem with the ability to manage our resources.
Don't you think that should be what we should go into Washington to learn? We should go to Washington to tell Joe Biden, teach us accountability, teach us how to manage our resources, teach us how to be truthful, be accountable in our management. That should be the focus.
Now, the first thing I'll say to, and I'm glad that you've ended with that question. The first thing I should say is that let our world, let our people, your public, your very prestigious public, which you admire, know that the 54 African delegations or states that are there are not there because they're looking for money. No, they're not there because they're looking for money. Money is one of the things we have to talk about, because even between you and I, we always talk about money now. But money, since it was created, is something you cannot do without talking about. But money does not make you, does not make me. Money does not make the world better. Even though it doesn't make us, we still have to talk about it. But they didn't go to Washington to talk about money, no. They went to Washington to talk about African development, African diplomacy, African issues, Africa's future, issues beyond money. The issues, all of which somehow need money, because no matter what you talk, I'm not an economist, but this thing we call money, we talk about it so much, we begin to wonder whoever created this thing called money. And why is money so in our lips so much? Yes, but they didn't go to talk about money. But then you've harped on something, you've touched on something, that even if they gave them, even if they gave them the total, as you know, again, I try not to talk about economy because economists know economics better. But you know, the GDP of the whole world is about, I think, 14 or 15 trillion dollars. And Africa, Africa does not have up to 3 trillion of the 13 or 14 trillion, which is the GDP of the world.
That was Professor Elvis Ngolle there talking about money, because as you know, President Joe Biden has promised to finance some development projects in the continent amounting to billions of dollars, of course. And we're talking about money. Do you think that our African leaders are there to beg for money? Or do you think they are thinking of what they can get from the United States in terms of technology, in terms of advice?
Elvis, I want to say one thing. I had earlier said international diplomacy is all about interest. When you don't have interest, there's no action. I don't want to think that African leaders have gone to the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit to beg for money. Because I say one of the richest continents which still has underexploited resources, natural resources, is Africa. I think the raison d'etre for the African leaders there is see how they can learn to preach and practice democracy. I want to think so. How they can preach peace. I want to think so. How they can preach prosperity, security, health, democracy. You see, the AGOA Act, African Growth and Opportunity Act, which was signed back 2000, this was a way out for the US of A to pave the way for African countries to send their goods to the African market, maybe on a reduced custom duty or tax-free. But we begin to ask ourselves again, has the AGOA, what are the achievements of AGOA? Signed some 22 years ago, because it was signed in the year 2000. Has it produced the fruits which we really need? These are some of the questions which are supposed to be posed there. Since nobody is an island, I think the summit will make some of the African leaders, I mean some, in quotes, who dictators, maybe to learn to know that they must be tolerant. They must practice democracy. They must practice a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. That is what America stands for. Because America cannot invite them and then tell them when they get back home, go and torture your people. No. They have to be, when leaving America, I know business opportunities will be created, because the Cameroon delegation that went, it had people of that sector who had to create links with other people, because when President Biden was making the speech, he did make allusion to, I think, 300 companies. So you see, if each state can create a rapprochement with, let's say, only 10, 20 companies, and in earnest, the investment is done in Africa, I think it will be a laudable initiative. So I don't think that African leaders have gone to Washington, D.C. to go make money, but rather to create opportunities. Yes, because the world is made of opportunities, and when you don't create them, and then you create the enabling environment, I don't see how the people are going to develop. But when they get there with the aim of taking money, it will mean that they can take the money with the right hand, and then it goes out on the left hand without presuming the required value. When President Biya was talking, he was talking about the transformation that Africa should learn to transform her own products. Well, it's belated yet, because the highest African country who has gotten independence now, I think, is more than 60 years. If it's only after 60 years that we can begin to think that we must do the transformation of our products here, because the wood is exported, the petrol is exported crude there. Almost everything is transformed in Europe, in America, in Russia, before being brought back to Africa. We suffer because when you want to even look at the GDP, as Professor Ngolle was talking, the gross domestic product, or the balance of payments. I'm not an economist, but my small economics, you see, there is always that deficit in balance of payments at the end of it all, because it's like a one-way traffic.
Do you see, I mean, let's look at what President Biya said about, which has gone viral too, and I highly appreciated across Africa, that we should learn to transform our raw materials in Africa. And of course, that is what President Biya was saying. Do you think the United States and other Western countries are going to appreciate President Biya speaking out clearly on these issues in the United States?
Elvis, it's not an issue of whether they appreciate or they not appreciate. We have it here. We have the wood here. We have all of the natural resources here. I think that should be one of the reasons.
We need to tell them that is what we are supposed to do. Should we not just go ahead and transform our local materials?
It just shows you again that some of our leaders are handpicked. They are stooges. Permit me use that word, because if it's today, you have to go tell somebody Africa needs to transform her raw materials into finished products, because not only will it create employment, but it will add value. Yes, apart from creating employment, which you see, there is a massive exodus of Africans to European and American countries. So if that is done, if there is a transformation of our natural resources on the spot, it will create employment, it will add value, and then our GDP too will increase, and then our balance of payments too will have to balance, because at each time we are always on the deficit when it comes to doing all those balances.
I'll get back to you. Let me get to Mr. Kunguba now to look at the amount of money that President Joe Biden has promised to give our continent. President Joe Biden has announced $55 billion of U.S. funding, which is going to be pumped into our continent over the next 3 years, which includes $100 million too for clean energy projects, and $350 million for internet access and digital technology. Now, but before you comment on that amount of money which President Joe Biden has promised our continent, I would like you to comment on President Biya's speech over there in Washington, calling on African leaders to transform their raw materials in Africa, to make Africa an industrialized continent. What I'm asking is that the right place to say this? Should African leaders not, have a forum where they can come together like the AU forum and discuss these issues and implement without even announcing it to the Western world?
I think that was a strong message that President Biya was sending out to Americans, because, even if we are transforming today, we still depend on them, because the machines that will help us transform will come from them. And it was time, and it was very timely as well, to inform them solemnly in front of everybody and other head of states that Africa is ready and willing to transform their raw materials from their countries, because first of all, you have to know that Africa is 61.5% the market after transformation. Are you getting me? 61.5 the market after transformation in all these foreign countries.
And do you think the foreign countries, for example, the United States, Europe, for instance, are they going to be happy that we are going to start transforming our
of course, I think with Europe there is the economic partnership that exists already with Europe, and just that the economic partnerships, the definition, the putting in place that economic partnership, a lot of things were not taken into consideration, and you have a lot of conditions for you to export after transformation from Cameroon. Now, having learned some lessons from the economic partnership with European Union, I think it's will be very easy today to put that partnership in place with America, and putting this partnership in place with America will make sure that there is transfer of technology, first of all, at the beginning, because if there is no transfer of technology, it means even if we are transforming here, those who will transform will come from elsewhere. So the transfer of technology must be one of the things that should be done at the beginning, and after that, products that are transformed in Cameroon should have the same standard, or in Africa should have the same standard at the international market like what they produce over there. Apart from that, there is a network that was put in place by the African Union about free exchange market. Things going from one country to the other without any disturbances, without paying a lot of custom duties, as it's already been done, which is the AFTAC. And today we hope that it will also help if transformation is being done. Apart from your question, you asked about the money that President Biden promised to Africa. That's, you said leaders did not go there to beg, but you see he's the one even promising money. So even if we did not beg, he will have made it available for us. They don't have any choice now. With the way Russia is accelerating things in Africa, so they have to renew their confidence with African countries. They have to seduce back African countries and leaders these days, because I can announce here, I just came back from St. Petersburg, which I spoke with members of government in Russia, where they confirmed that in February 2023 they will be holding the African-Russian summit as well. And we Africans today are the target of the entire world, the foreign countries and the Western world being their target. So we have to use that opportunity to impose what we want. And you see most of the investment that is being channeled to Africa, you will see that most of the money that they say they are giving goes back to them. When you take, for instance, vaccines, and you take one of the foundations, Melinda and Bill Gates foundations that are into vaccines, they are based in the US, and you see how much they get in Africa for these vaccines. When you take transformation of our natural resources like fuel, when they come and carry our fuel from Kribi, Bakassi, and all our rivers around, and they have to go and transform it elsewhere to come and sell it here at their price. Other things is that we have to know that this summit was not just focused on money, because apart from the main event that you had President Biden speaking with other leaders like President Biya, you had parallel events that was very, very powerful, and I was happy to see one of the events being chaired by a young Cameroonian, Nachaleke Christian, which was the African and Diaspora Young Leaders Forum. He was one of those moderating during that conference, that forum. Apart from that, you had the civil society as well. Civil society who went there in order to define certain things on the norms, because the summit was to try to see what is not working between US and Africa and what they think can be done. And our brother Ernest spoke here about the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is AGOA, which is an act that was signed, and today we are not seeing the repercussion or the outcome of signing this act with the U.S. Another thing that they talked of is the U.S.-Africa Space Forum. They talked about the space because with all what we are seeing around the world today, America is thinking or is seeing that they are losing a lot of power, even right up to the space. So they're trying to redefine this or strengthen the partnership in the 21st century with these African countries. Another thing that we think is very important for Africa, and during these conversations and our proposals that were done to those representing us over there, was to make sure that during this particular partnership, which was partnership on health, sustainable health and cooperation, sustainable health cooperation, it should be clear that if we are signing any partnership with US on health issues, they should know that we are capable also to bring some in our savoir-faire. We saw the example with COVID. Africans were the one who saved the world with what they discovered. But up to today, no international pharmaceutical company have decided, or even the World Health Organization, WHO, to recognize these vaccines and all the medications that were discovered by Africans in order to stop COVID. So during this partnership for sustainable health meeting, we thought it wise that Cameroonians, Africans representing us there, to insist on the fact that most of these firms have to be installed in Africa. Installed in Africa for us, first of all, we are the biggest consumers of their drugs, we are the biggest consumers of their vaccines, but they produce it over there to transport it back to Africa. The jobs stay back there. When they transport it to Africa, they sell it, money go back there.
Thank you, Kunguba. Let's get to the machines to listen to Professor Ngolle's perspective on what we should be requesting on the negotiation table in the United States.
Maybe you and I in Africa, 1.4 billion of us, 54 states, to be able to say we have come of age. We now put up management and governance systems that can enable us to be able to have good development planning, good accountability in order that we can achieve development. But don't expect that it's America, after 62 years of independence, that will have to tell you, how do you manage, how do you do development planning, how do you do, no. I think if we do that, we are being childish. And I'm one of those who believe that it's good to have a friend in America. It's good to have a friend in other countries, and I'm very glad to belong to a country which is open to partnerships and cooperation with everybody. But we shouldn't expect that it is these people, the Americans and the Chinese and the French, who have to tell us how to engage in the management of our resources, the management of our finances, the management of the planning of this or that. Why? If you can manage your family, you can manage the country. You can manage your farm, you can manage the country. What makes you think that America must come and tell you? That's why usually when I'm with colleagues and they believe that in order to solve Africa's problems, you must always go to Washington or to Paris or to London or to Hamburg or to Berlin. I think they are wrong. African problems and Africans are, after 62 years, are capable of solving these problems. And when Africans have gone like they've gone to Washington, and as they've been before in Beijing or in Paris or wherever, they are not going there to ask for someone to give them handouts or to give them or to teach them. They didn't go to school. Being in Washington is not a school to go to, but it's an opportunity for them to express. It's an opportunity for them to show their genius, who they are, what they think, and for the Americans to understand from them what their priorities are and what they share together and how they can work together. So it's a win-win. Americans will benefit from it according to their interests. African states, either collectively or bilaterally, will also benefit from it as per their interests. But at the end of the day, in any relationship, in any partnership, it should be a win-win situation. And I usually joke with my students also by saying, when we say a win-win situation, or when we say in international relations, is a zero-sum game. what we really mean is that you gain something, I gain something. You win something, I win something. But it does not mean that it's a 50-50. Because in these relationships, it could be 10-90, it could be 20-80, it could be 70-30, it could be 40-60, it could be 45-55, it could be 51-49, but they're all win-win situations. They're all win-win outcomes. But what you should avoid is, you should avoid a zero. Because if you get a zero, and worse still, what you should avoid is don't get into a minus column. But get something. Get something. Don't think that what you get should be equal to what the other person gets, because when you go into international relations, there's equality in law in the books. But between you and I, international relations functions on the basis of
Thank you, Professor Ngolle. Of course, I would know you want to comment on what he's saying. Professor is saying that in any case, when we are on the negotiation table, it should always be a win-win partnership, but sometimes it might not be 50-50, but at least we should make sure we leave the table with something.
Elvis, win-win means 50-50. When it's not 50-50, it doesn't mean it's win-win. Somebody is already having power on the other person. And I want to say that the partnership between Western countries and Africa will difficultly be win-win. We are trying to see how other countries are trying to demarcate themselves from what they used to do, like Russia, India, Brazil. They're trying to demarcate, and China demarcate themselves, and we are seeing the progress and developments in Africa, most countries where they are involved in development issues. Talking of development and asking if after 60 years of independence, we should be asking people how to show us how to develop a development plan. Sir, it's never too late to learn. If we are humble enough to know that our development plan is not permitting us to get the result expected, we should ask for help and make sure that we implement it well without being biased.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, you're watching 90 Minutes in Africa. This is a Pan-African program that takes a look at happenings in the continent and how happenings around the world affect our beloved continent. And in this edition of the program, we are zooming in on the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which is holding in Washington, D.C., and what Africa can gain from this summit as our leaders have gone out to represent the continent. And of course, Ernest Akufo, let's take a look at some of the countries that were not invited to this summit: Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, because according to the United States Department of State, these are countries where, with the history of coup d'etats, so many coup d'etats going on in these countries, and also true, there was also Eritrea that was not invited. Now, should it be a trophy for the other African leaders that were invited? For example, Equatorial Guinea, should they celebrate, of course, that the United States, every country that has been invited by the United States should celebrate that the United States is recognizing the democracy, the United States is recognizing the human rights records?
Well, I don't think the countries who invited at the U.S.-African Leaders Summit are perfect. Yes, they aren't.
Cameroon have not been there.
Yeah. Lionel, please. I just want to think that when you have very poor human rights records, because as Lionel was rightly saying that some countries which are there, like Cameroon couldn't be there, I don't know the criteria which was used.
But why do you think Cameroon shouldn't be there?
Well, Lionel did say it. I want to think that, permit me bring this aside. I want to think that one of the reason deaths of President Biya going to the summit is you see the problem in the northwest and southwest regions, and the arrest of some of the leaders of the struggle, I think that's one of the major reasons that took President Biya to the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. So if some of them are there, and then the ones we cited, Eritrea and the like, Sudan are not there, well, I think their human rights records are not all that catastrophic, though they may be beyond reasonable doubt, doubting. Yes, too doubting. Nonetheless, I think as we're talking of those who are there flying their flags, I don't see them flying their flags. Rather, it would serve like an incentive to them that, hey, if these ones were not called and were called up, it means there is a mirror, there is a camera which is focused on us, and that if we falter at any one point in time, Ali, we are caught in the dragnet like the other ones. But shall they change? Some of them, when they return from that summit, or will they assimilate the lessons which they have been? Professor Ngolle was saying a few minutes ago that they didn't go to learn anything new from there. I think they went to learn something new. Even if they are not learning something new, it will mean that they are being recalled that this is what ought to have been done, which is not being done. Because you heard President Biya when he said Africa should begin to transform her products now. After about more than 60 years of independence, why is it only now that African countries should think of transforming their products? So they needed to go to that summit to be told, or for that to be said. The AU summit is there, which some African leaders don't attend. For we cannot know why. Whereas these are platforms where all of these things which are being said in America ought to have been said. Nevertheless, the summit, apart from the health domains, the security issues, and the good governance issues which will be discussed there, I think very many lessons will be learned from there. And we saw some people already writing letters, some of the activists and some concerned Cameroonians were out there writing letters, making proposals to the head of state as per a long-lasting solution to the Anglophone crisis, which seems to be one of the abandoned crises of recent times, because since 2016 till now, the casualties, the rampage on property, and the assault is extravagant. And we just but hope that when President Biya returns from the US, there should be a new twist in getting a genuine and long-lasting solution to the Anglophone problem. Because for sure, some of the leaders fighting for the Anglophone cause are out there. And how I wish they met, because they've been longing to see how they could meet each other, because they feared when the major national dialogue held here, some of them couldn't come for security reasons. But I think if they're opportune to meet there, it will be a laudable initiative, because the war is long overdue.
Mr. Kunguba, let's take a look at the countries that were not invited. We are talking about Mali, Sudan, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Eritrea. Of course, when you look at some of the reasons why they were not invited, you see, for instance, I'm looking at Mali, there was a coup d'etat by Colonel Assimi Goïta. We have Burkina Faso, also 2 coup d'etats in less than 9 months. We have Eritrea. The U.S. does not have any formal diplomatic ties with Eritrea, so it was not, the country was not invited. And then also to Guinea, 2 coup d'etats. But do you think this should be the only reason? And we also say that the closeness of some of these countries to Russia could also be a reason. That okay? And also in some ways is that if you try to get close to Russia, we are not going to invite you.
I think the other leaders present there ought to make it clear that if other countries, all the African countries are not coming, they will not come. But because the solidarity is not strong, they went there. And one of the topics of discussion during this forum is talking about coup and transition to civilian governance. When you talk about coup and transition to civilian governance without inviting leaders of most countries where these coups have been perpetrated and still going on, what do you think you can give them as lesson after the summit? For now, the 5 countries that were cited, most of them, the reasons that was given by the U.S., by the Department of State are different. Each country has its own reason. I'll take, for instance, Burkina Faso. They talked about the humanitarian situation in which they are finding themselves. Thus, the humanitarian situation in which a country finds itself prevents the leaders and those who can talk on behalf of the country to be present in short summits. But I think they are just trying to cover up, because most of these countries cited are very close to Russia, and today Russia is showing a difference in those countries, and they know clearly that the support that they receive from Russia is helping them to change the narratives than what they have been receiving from other Western countries for long. I believe that the African Union, which is headed by Musa Fakil, ought to play a very big role by mediating between a country like the U.S., who has a lot of droit de veto, who has a lot of veto rights in African countries, to make sure that most of these countries, and that could be a platform where a lot of things could be discussed. Because, as I said, during this panel, which is talking about coups and transition to civilians, only civilians will be there talking. Those who perpetrated the coups will be back in their countries. So how will they do after the
So do you see that too as a sign that the United States government does not practice what they preach?
Of course.
In the sense that,
of course,
if it was another country, they would tell them to carry out dialogue without any preconditions. But now they're inviting people, and when you're inviting people to talk with, you should not only engage those that agree with you, you should engage those who that disagree with you. That is, call up the coup leaders, meet them on the table, and explain to them why you don't understand why they organize the coups.
That's what we call,
and explain to them why they shouldn't organize coups.
That's what we call selected democracy. Selected democracy, why? Because they select with whom they have to practice their democracy. And I said, most of these countries who are there today, some of the leaders did not even have the opportunity to talk. Few leaders out of the leaders that left Africa and went to this summit spoke. Some of the leaders were not even received by President Biden. Why? Because they know he received the focal points, some of the focal points who are heads in sub-regions in Africa, like President Biya in Central Africa, and Macky Sall in Senegal, which is a bit like the head in West Africa. So these are the things that are done, and we know perfectly that it's because of the menace that they are receiving from Russia in Africa, because of the way BRIC countries are infiltrating countries in Africa, and they are seeing that what they used to gain from African countries is not that stable. It has reduced. If you notice, President Obama 8 years ago foresaw what is going on, and that's why today we are it's only after 8 years that they are calling back a summit like this. And calling back a summit like this for 3 days, I don't think things that concern a continent like Africa with 54 countries can be discussed in 3 days. It can't be discussed in 3 days, but I know that the summit was prepared before, and after the summit, commissions and working groups will be put in place for many things to be done. But I ask myself, do we really think this summit, apart from US securing what is good for them, Africa will benefit something from that? Will this stop young Africans from going through desert to join, or through Mexico to join America? But when Americans want to come to Cameroon, they don't have any problem. When they want to go to any African country, they don't have any problem for visa. Will this stop all what we are seeing in various countries? No, please. I think we have to be more matured and to be capable to take things at hand in Africa.
Ernest Akufo, I want you to comment on the technological aspect of this summit, in the sense that if the United States of America wants to encourage Africa in its technological drive, and then if the United States of America wants to encourage Africa in terms of expenditure, that is to reduce expenditure and focus on the needs of the people, clearly at the time when we have very, very low standards of living, when the cost of living is very high in the continent, don't you think it was important for the United States to ensure that this kind of summit is digital, maybe via Zoom? Of course, because based on information coming in, some heads of state, are spending fabulous amounts of money just per night, to sleep at night, with various delegations. Or do you think the physical presence was still also important?
Well, the world is becoming a global village, and you just make a scroll and everything is at your reach. But I think if America is talking about a digitalized world, it's very important and of utmost necessity in the fact that, in the sense that, well, you're asking whether they could not hold a Zoom meeting. I think even after the Zoom meetings, action still has to take place. Movements of either equipment has to take place, or things of that nature. So the physical meeting was of utmost importance. Utmost importance in the sense that when you talk one-on-one with a person, it's different from the chats we do on the modern technological tools, because you look at someone eyebrow to eyebrow. When you give somebody a hug when you're there together, it touches the mind. But I want to think that when you give it goes on phone or through internet, it rather much touches the head. So I think the rapprochement which the U.S. president made was good. You're talking about expenses. Well, that's the meaning of holding such positions, you know, because immediately you will power. There are a lot of things which goes with it. You see, when they signed decrees appointing people, Article 2, most people are waiting for that article. Yes, the appointed person shall benefit on diseases which are linked to the post of responsibility. I think that is what preoccupies some people when they get appointed, rather than they do the job upon which they are appointed to do. That said, fabulous sums of money being spent in hotels or bills with delegations, movements all on left and right. Who foots the bill? I think if the U.S. doesn't foot the bill, because frankly speaking, I don't know if they don't foot the bill or part of the bill, it will go to the invited countries who have to pay some of the bills. Notwithstanding, we're talking about monies which will be given to by the U.S. government to some of the states which were invited to develop their technology. When the monies are given, are they given for free? I don't think so. There is something in return. Professor Ngolle did talk about...
And they never announced that.
Yeah, no, they cannot... Yeah, because Professor Ngolle was talking a few minutes ago about a win-win situation. I want to think that in as much as international diplomacy is all about interest, because when there's no interest, it's because the Americans have seen that inviting African countries over there, it's at their interest. Because if they hadn't gotten the interest, they wouldn't invite them there. But when you begin to talk about win-win, that somebody can win 35, 65, 20, 80, 70, 30, I don't think that's what it will all mean. Because win-win, to my understanding, will mean if I have this bottle of water, Elvis should equally have the same bottle, or Lionel. But if it will mean that Lionel's bottle will be much more bigger than mine, it means along the line I'm being cheated, right? Yes, I'm being cheated. it will be a cause for concern, and that's just what the world is all about, because the world is a capitalist society, especially the American society. It's a capitalist society. Nothing goes for nothing, because before President Biden invites a host of important, an avalanche of African head of states to come over there, it's not for nothing.
Okay, and let's get to Professor Elvis Ngolle to listen to the win-win partnership he thinks Africa should have with the United States.
I'm one of those who believes that the Washington U.S-Africa Summit will, in terms of the stakes, in terms of agreements, in terms of investments, and in terms of a new partnership, a new engagement by the United States, African states will win. I'm very convinced about that, because a few weeks ago, as you know, a few months ago, if you recall, the State Department did issue through the mouth of the American Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, did issue a declaration of a new U.S. foreign policy strategy for Sub-Saharan Africa. If you recall, there's a document just a few months ago. That was a declaration which was issued by the State Department through the mouth of the Secretary of State, meaning the Minister of External Relations, Anthony Blinken, where it was clearly written that American foreign policy towards Africa now will be based on 4 pillars. And again, the 4 pillars, if you can recall, that document is, I'm sure if you go to Google, you will see it. There are 4 pillars. I think one of them is economic development investments. So the other one, I think, is democracy promotion and so forth. The other one, I think, is climate or something like that. And I think the third one, or the fourth one, is security or something like that. You just look at the document, you see there are 4 pillars on which the new American foreign policy strategy towards Africa will hinge on. And this has been declared just a few months ago. It's in it's a public document. That should tell Africans that the discussion that we have should go along the lines of these 4 pillars which have been enunciated by the American government through its State Department. Why not? Therefore, I'm one of those who believes that this conference will end on a positive note, unlike any other one, or unlike the one in 2014, which was the initiative of President Obama. And I tell people that beyond the geopolitical and geostrategic interests of America when it comes to Africa, there is something people keep forgetting. There is the historical cultural factor which people forget. America cannot afford to play with Africa. You know what? 12% of our population is African. And not only is 12% of America's population African, and the Democrats are very conscious of this all the time, and don't forget the Obama and the Biden administrations are typically democratic administrations. Not only is the 12% of the population of 340 million African, but about 5 million Africans live in the United States.
Okay, that was Professor Elvis Ngolle. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, you're watching 90 Minutes in Africa, your Pan-African program coming to you from a media time television, the African Eye. In the course of the U.S.-African Leaders Summit, Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo urged African countries to stop begging from the West if they need to deserve some respect. Of course, he urged African countries to stop begging from the West and said if we stop being beggars and spend African money inside the continent, Africa will not need to ask for respect from anyone. Let's get an excerpt of his speech and then we analyze that, and then that's going to be from there we are going to conclude the show. But let's get an excerpt of President Nana Akufo-Addo's speech during this summit.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thank the African and Diaspora Young Leaders Forum for making me part of this conversation and for the opportunity to deliver these remarks at the closing plenary in the presence of the U.S. Vice President, the Honorable Kamala Harris, and in this spectacular building, so admired by all Ghanaians, and indeed by all Africans, as it was designed by one of the foremost architects of his generation, the globally acclaimed Ghanaian architect, David Adjaye. The forum has chosen the most relevant theme of Africa's contemporary situation, a theme which sums up the essence of African aspirations, amplifying voices, building partnerships that work. I've stated it before, that it sometimes appears the words Africa and Africans have more resonance outside the continent than inside. When we are home on our continent, it always seems very important to assert that we are Ghanaians, Ivorians, Kenyans, Nigerians, Swazis, Senegalese, Rwandans, South Africans, and Zambians. Then we find ourselves outside the continent, and then we discover that to the outside world, there are no Ghanaians, there are no Senegalese, and there are no Tanzanians. There are only Africans, and we are all simply Africans. The lesson for me is clear. Our destinies are intricately linked with each other, and we're talking not only about those of us on the continent, but about the Africans in the diaspora as well. You can be an honors graduate from any of the top universities of this country. You can be a second or third generation American, and you can be in a well-paid job. If there's an outbreak of Ebola someplace on the African continent, you are an African. Anyone, everybody in the position of leadership in Africa today, thus has his or her work cut out. The urgent responsibility we face is to make our countries and our continent attractive for our peoples, to see them as places of opportunities. It means we must provide education, quality education and skills training. It means our young people must acquire the skills that run modern economies. The impact of a successful Africa on the image and standing of Africans in the diaspora applies with equal force to the image and standing of her sons and daughters who go by the name African Americans, and indeed to all her kith and kin in the Americas and the Caribbean. There's a lot of room for your perspectives and energies back in Africa. History tells us of the positive impact of diasporic communities on the growth and development of countries through increased trade activities, rising investments, and the transfer of skills and knowledge. Take the case of China, for example. With an emigre population of some 60 million, the Chinese diaspora is said to be the 25th largest country in the world, who, according to the Nikkei Asian Review, own assets worth 2.5 trillion United States dollars. When foreign companies in the late 1970s reduced their investments in China, it was the Chinese diaspora that shored up the economy. According to the Washington, D.C.-based Migration Policy Institute, MPI, half of the foreign direct investment, that is some 26 billion United States dollars, that transformed China into a manufacturing powerhouse in the 1990s, originated from the Chinese diaspora. That is the rationale of Ghana's initiative of Beyond the Return, which is building on the considerable success of the Year of Return and the renewed enthusiasm around building Africa together. We must work to help change the African narrative, which has been characterized largely by a concentration on disease, hunger, poverty, and illegal mass migration. Let us all remember that the destiny of all black people, no matter where they are in the world, is bound up with Africa. We should never forget that famous admonition of the celebrated Jamaican reggae star Peter Tosh, when he said, and I quote, "Don't care where you come from. As long as you are a black man, you are an African," unquote. We must help make Africa the place for investment, progress, and prosperity, and not from where our youth flee in the hope of accessing the mirage of a better life in Europe, Asia, or the Americas. That is what the Beyond the Return seeks to do, so we can derive maximum dividends from our relations with the diaspora in mutually beneficial cooperation, and as partners for shared growth and development. The second half of the 20th century witnessed a great blow for human progress and freedom when the African peoples, in the wake of Ghana's shining example, liberated themselves from the colonial and imperialist yoke and the racist ideology of apartheid and emerged as free, independent peoples to construct new nations of hope and advancement. The first half of the 21st century should consolidate this development and see the growth of modern, prosperous, technologically advanced nations within a united Africa, which would make a reality of the dream of the 21st century as the African century, and bring dignity and respect to black people all over the world. We've done enough talking, and dare I say we've had enough conferences and workshops. We know what we need to do. It is time just to do it. We've run out of excuses for the state of our continent. We have the manpower. We should have the political will. It is time to make Africa work. We have good reason to be proud of who we are and the beautiful continent that is ours with its vibrant cultures. The geographic space covered by Africa makes it the second largest of the 7 continents. It has 30% of the world's remaining minerals of value. It has some of the most breathtaking scenes on our planet. It has plants and animals that are wonders of the world and critical for the survival of the globe. I hear a lot about the need to change our narrative and tell our own good story. Ladies and gentlemen, as the saying goes, nothing succeeds like success. If we work at it, if we stop being beggars and spend Africa's monies inside the continent, Africa would not need to ask for respect from anyone. We will get the respect we deserve. Over 30 years ago, one of America's most prestigious Ivy League universities offered a course in Mandarin, which for years had virtually no takers. Today, there is standing room only. And it is not because the course is any easier. It is because the position of China has changed. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, China was nowhere near where it is today. China does not ask for anyone for respect now. She does not need it. Let us make our continent the prosperous and joyful place it should be, and the respect will follow. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was President Akufo-Addo of Ghana delivering the keynote speech there, of course, which we listened to here in the studio. Ernest Akufo, what is the lesson you learned from this speech, and do you see it as more theoretical, or you think we can make it practical?
I want to first of all, I don't know, giving a clap to President Akufo. for that pronouncement, because the speech was pregnant with a lot of meaning. Africa has to start thinking out of the box, because we've been circumscribed, and we think that we must only get lessons from somewhere before we can forge ahead. We should take our destiny into our hands. Thank you, Mr. President. You see, you were talking about, a few minutes ago, we were talking about maybe holding the summit on Zoom. It wouldn't have the impact which we just got there. Because, you see, he was addressing a people and talking from his heart and not talking from his head. You see that all of the things he was saying, at every one time he made a good pronouncement, people were cheering, clapping up, because what he's saying is factual, what he's saying is true. And when we listen to that, the next thing to do is we must implement. Because when we just go at talking without having to implement what is being said, it will mean that all of what we're doing is playing to the gallery. But I do well think that after the U.S. and the African Leaders Summit ends, a lot of I do hope that, why could the AU not hold again immediately after this, so that all of what was being said there should be put into practice. I think that would be a laudable initiative.
Kunguba, President Akufo-Addo is making this speech just a day after the International Monetary Fund decided to give Ghana $3 billion loan to alleviate an unprecedented economic downturn in his country. We know too that Ghana is in high debt, facing a historic inflation of more than 40% and a collapse in its currency, the cedi. Don't you see that it's something paradoxical that he's making this speech at a time too, when, of course, Ghana, let's use the word he used, begging a loan from the International Monetary Fund?
Some of these countries are forced and even obliged to take these loans from IMF and other international donors. First, because they are already into debts, and in order to reach to a stable state, you need some money. And reaching that stable state, you need that money. We talked of transformation here, and we talked of transfer of technology, which is something very important. Today, the announcement, he set the pace, and I just believe that is something which is realizable if the political will of African leaders is there. Because if we don't have the political will, it's not possible. Meaning, Ghana have to leave before the implementation of his things here is being done. And for Ghana to leave, they need finances. And one of the things which makes Ghana to be into this problem today is because these Western countries do everything not to valorize the cities, the Ghana cities. You take the example of Central Africa, where they use the franc CFA zone. They will tell you that there's a percentage that is in the treasury of the French treasury. In the French treasury. What's that percentage for? The next day you will hear that the French are coming to Cameroon, they are borrowing money to Cameroonians because they want to export your wood, they want to export your minerals and everything. They will tell you that, and they are taking your money and borrowing it to you and taking your natural resources. And they borrow you that money on high rate, interest rate. Please, for once, this money is our money, and the money comes from our natural resources. When they give it, we should take it. The only political thing that most of the emerging countries are doing today, like China, is to make sure that some of the debts that they have with these African countries have been cancelled, and which is a good policy and good politics that they are playing. And they are binding and tying more stronger the relationship that they have with these African countries.
Okay, your last word, Ernest Akoufou, before we end the program?
Well, I think the U.S.-African Leaders Summit is a laudable initiative, especially when I listen to President Nana Akufo. It touches my heart. Yeah, because you feel somebody talking from the depth of his heart what's supposed to be done. There should be a different mindset if Africa has to come out of this doldrum, because it's needless. Every day we run into the International Monetary Fund, we're going left and right, whereas the resources are there. I say Africa is and remains one of the continents, the richest continents we still have, be it in human resources, be it in natural resources. Africa still has everything intact. Why can't we not change the mentality, the bad faith of some of our leaders? Because if we are where we are today, always running to the International Monetary Fund, going beggarly, is because some of our leaders are using the hard hand on their people and they're careless about the well-being of their people, without which, if everything were put on the platter of gold, I think he did talk of exodus. Yes, the youths are going to other countries. So it was nice being here, Elvis. I just hope that next time I will give them another opportunity to...
Of course. Thank you so much, Lionel Kunguba, for coming.
Thank you, Elvis, for inviting me and associating us to this great topic.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, too, we also want to thank Professor Elvis Ngolle, our international relations specialist, for his contribution in the show. It is an honor that we draw the curtains for today's edition of 90 Minutes in Africa, produced by Rumia Gacha, with the coordination of Lionel and the supervision of Brian Tambo.